Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. This week, we're really going to start picking up other committees' bills in earnest. So recommend from this point forward, you check out our committee schedule on Mondays if you can, so you can get a sense of what's coming this week. So if you have advanced questions, or if you are the committee liaison to a committee that's going to have a bill coming over, you're talking to me about that. Or if you anticipate that there's a bill that's on our schedule that you might have more questions or thoughts about than I might anticipate with my non-psychic senses, let me know about that so Sorsha can schedule some more time or a different witness. But we're going to start flying through some stuff as some of the bottleneck eases and then maybe starts again. So looking forward to it though. So we can, we'll do like 15 things at once, right? And one of those things is Brad James and an update on the school budgets. We're going to do this once a week until we hit about 75%, and we'll make a decision.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
For the record, Brad James, Agency of Education. Happy Valentine's Day and welcome to spring. So I'm here to bring you an update on preliminary budgets we've received so far. Preliminary expenditure is probably a better term. But we now have 73.5% of the districts reporting. We're up there. We have 86 districts in at this point. So it was helpful when I reminded people that I wanted the data. I think is really what it was. So anyway, we have quite a few coming in at this point. And if you recall, last time we had 24 districts in, and we had an education spending FY23 of increase of 8.98%. With this new cohort coming in, we're at 8.2%. So it's in actually the right direction. It's coming down because I had made the projection of 8.5%. Actually just over 8.5. So that's basically where we stand at the moment. We still have a few large districts out. I think I put them on your screen, didn't I? Yes, I did. Okay, now down at the bottom. The colors mean something to me. You can ignore the colors, but they tell me something when I'm looking at my files. But the two biggest ones that we have out still are Champlain Valley and Burlington. And their education spending for FY23 is that next column over to the right. And you can see that Champlain Valley is almost $76 million and Burlington is almost $74 million. So just about the same size. I took the top 10 by equalized pupils who had not submitted data to us. And it totals about just over $351 million. And that's equivalent to about 22% of the FY23 education spending. So we still have a chunk out there, but I'm feeling more confident that we're in that 8.2%. However, Burlington, as you know, is kind of a bit of a wild card. I don't know what they're doing at the moment. I have not heard. I don't know where they stand in terms of their bond issue and such. I did play with numbers very briefly. I took both Champlain Valley and Burlington because they're not quite half, but they're almost half of what's outstanding in the top 10. And I increased each of them by 10%, their education spending. And when I did that, the education spending for the state for this cohort, if I added them in there, went up to 8.4%. Just over. If I increase them by 20%, which I don't think would happen in Champlain Valley's case, but it's possible in Burlington's case, depending on how big the bond payments are, it went up to 9.6% for the state as a whole, an increase. So again, as I said, kind of the real wild card out there right now is Burlington in terms of what they're going to do. I just don't know and haven't been told. But otherwise, we're in that area, roughly about what I was projecting, slightly below, which makes me happier. But this top 10 here has enough impact to move it without the Burlington issue. They can still move it somewhat. So that's kind of where we stand at the moment.
Can you remind me what the anticipated increase was in the December 1st letter?
8.52%.
We're at 8.2.
And we're at 8.2 now.
Okay.
Thank you. Do you have a sense when you'll get these folks in?
They all have budgets. None of these historically are late voting districts. So I'll just get back in touch with them and hopefully for the next week.
Cool.
If I could get, 5 of these 10 in, I'd be pretty confident where we are.
I'll talk to St. Johnsbury.
Please do.
They don't have a business.
I know. I wasn't worried about St. Johnsbury. I know right where they stand. So I've been talking to Glenn. So, but I mean, if I could get CVU, Burlington, Berry, Rutland City, and Taconic, and Greene, and Milton, we would have a pretty good idea of where we stand. And I'll get in touch with them.
Thanks. Thank you, Brad.
Very that quick.
Really appreciate it coming in.
Okay.
Actually, sorry, I do have, as you're packing up. When you talk to districts about their budgeting process for this year, how much does it seem to you districts are sort of pre-budgeting for the weighting changes?
I think at this point, I don't think they are. Not that I've heard anyway. We haven't had a direct conversation about it, but usually people would ask me. They are interested in what the numbers are, what they would be. I mean, again, as I think I said last time I was in last week, I did run FY23 numbers. This is before I had FY24 equalized pupils. I did run FY23 numbers in the new weighting system so they compare the new weighted count to the FY23. And I even took the step of showing them both what unweighted FY23 was in equalized pupils. And then I did unweighted FY23 new weights. And I actually ran an equalized pupil calc so they could do whichever way they wanted to compare. But I haven't heard that people are thinking that this is going to be going to really impact their budgeting yet. I think it will probably as I get it going, but I haven't heard front loading, so to speak, the 24 budget at the moment. But it's a good question to ask them directly.
Yeah. Are you able to ask them, when's your next, do you have another meeting?
The next meeting, we just met Friday, basically the second Friday of every month is when they meet. But I also will send questions out to them via email.
It's going to be a big change for a lot of districts, and it seems like a change that we sort of built it in as a change that people would have time to ready themselves for, but I know the districts are dealing with so much right now. It's really hard to be.
And we as a group tend to focus on, I mean, it's a little bit like a bell curve when you look at how things are going to change. Some people aren't changing very much, and it's either way. And we tend to focus on these people here. Most people are in this area here, so it's not going to be terribly significant. But those outer extremities, they will be. So
and your list here has some of those more extremes. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Now I'm done.
Okay.
Julia, do you want to come up and just sort of, sure, in case folks want to have some hypothetical conversations a little bit? As we're building up to the yield bill and everyone's thinking about this, do folks have questions from sort of last week when we went through the outlook, or as the numbers are coming in that we should be thinking about with Julia? Okay. I'm going to flag for next week that I'm thinking a lot about next year's pupil weighting implementation, and if there's anything we need to be doing this year to help people prepare for next year. Because I don't, at least the districts that I speak with regularly are so flat out with student need and staff and teacher need that they're not able to be planning long-term right now. And I think it's actually unfair to be expecting that of them right now. They're still really deep in pandemic crisis. And so I want to make sure that we're thinking forward if they're not able to. Scott, you good?
Yep.
Cool. Thanks for sitting there for a minute, Julia. Appreciate it. Cool, thanks. So next up, we're talking about the non-homestead property categorization. Catherine did some work with Abby last week to try to figure out some of the pieces. Are there threads that have been sitting with people over the weekend about that conversation? I'm trying myself to stay out of the weeds of if the tax rates change, then what would we have to do? Because we can deal with that when and if we decide to do that in the future, but that's not what we're doing right now. And so I'm trying not to create problems before there are problems in front of me, which is hard.
Yeah.
So I had a question about the definition of land, but I might wait for Abby.
Yeah. We can actually pull up the language if that's posted.
Of open land, I should say.
And it has changed a little.
Yeah.
I guess I know that it's irrespective of the current use status of the land.
Mhm.
But according to this language, there is no carve out for like 2 acres or whatever. So it would just be every bit of the land, even if there's like a home on it or a business. So I guess I just wanted to think through that. Or have someone tell me, no, you're totally reading this wrong.
I think you're reading it wrong. But Abby can talk us through sort of how the land would be divided, which I feel like is sort of, feels to me like the final sticking point if the definitions are looking good to people.
I mean, I think right now, this would only apply to a parcel that does not have a habitable home. It does not have a. So
That are not dwellings, I see what
that
you're
are,
saying.
so
Yeah.
like this is the category
Mhm.
that's not a homestead, that's not a rental, that doesn't have a significantly infrastructure supported.
It's an important detail that I clearly missed. Thank you.
Which would be different than an approach where we would have some carve out
Yeah.
across all the parcels.
Thank you for that.
Are there witnesses that folks want to hear from about these categories? I know sort of whoever would be implementing the IT folks would want to hear from.
I think we should hear from Vala. And the reason is that we had a legislative breakfast. I mean, I was sort of thinking along this line anyway, but what solidified it for me was on Saturday morning, we had a legislative breakfast in the town of Fairfax. Select Board was there. They have a lister, one woman who they call the assessor. She does all the, and said she had gotten some communication from Vala on this bill. I started talking about the bill thinking they didn't know anything about it. She was quite well versed in as far as we've come. But she indicated that Vala had sent out some information and they were negative on it. That
On this bill, not the appraisal bill, but the non-homestead bill.
This,
Okay.
the non,
Okay,
yeah.
cool. Okay.
So we should definitely have them in and just see where they're at.
Yeah.
She might have been not right, but whatever.
Yeah.
We should.
Absolutely.
I'm still not clear about like how the parcel gets identified this way. Is this something that I am self-attesting to, like I do my homestead declaration? Or is this a responsibility that we're asking investors to do? And I think that would impact suggestion of additional witnesses or not. Like whoever is doing this, I want to hear from them about their
Yes.
ability to do it.
Yes.
Vala's the Vermont Listers and Sisters.
Association,
Yeah.
right?
Sorry, I should have said.
No, it's all right.
It just strikes me, in some communities, the communication with the lister or assessor goes through either the select board, the manager, or the clerk. And I wonder if the clerk treasurer's
Association.
yeah, Carol might have a view of this in terms of how could we get out in front of the unease, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not sure, but I know little towns oftentimes, they don't have a direct pipeline to the listers. There's no, all the mail goes to somebody else and maybe it gets there and maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
I think ballot's a good idea.
So, and PVR, we actually haven't heard from yet on this bill.
Yeah.
Felt like we had one bill that we were sort of co-developing with them. It seemed like too much to ask them to fully co-develop two bills with us simultaneously. Hi, Abby.
Hi. You ready for me?
Yeah, we've started sort of looking through things and naming some witnesses we want to hear. And then I think hearing from you about this new language is helpful. And then also this question about how, under this bill, how properties, non-homestead properties would be actually designated, like the actual designation process.
Representative.
Great. So for the record, Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel. This is posted under my name. It's draft 1.7 now, so there was some further changes. There were some further changes that I made on Friday. This is following the last discussion. I took off the highlighting from last week and added just what's new in here. So if you want to jump to page 2. This primarily makes changes to the open land and structures definition, and then further makes changes on the third page to how the categories would interact with each other. So the first on page 2 is to subdivision D. This takes out a lot of the language that we discussed at length last week, and primarily simplifies and tries to make it clear that when there is a property that has a building or a human habitable type of building, not a structure, so a fence or a barn would still be part of this. But regardless of whether land is enrolled in current use or not, any type of land, also the use is now removed, any type of land and any structure would be under this category. This is my understanding from the direction from the committee. What this does not do is separate one piece of land. If it had a business use on it and then open land, that would not fall into this category the way it's drafted now. This really gets at more of the idea of vacant land, but that maybe has a fence or a shed or something that's not a building that would otherwise fall into another category. So that can be changed, but that's what I had understood from the committee's discussion. I also took out, I made this very broad. So now it's any area of land, no mention of forest land or agricultural land. This is any type of land. There is still that irrespective of whether it's enrolled or not in current use. And again, this does not change any taxation or valuation of land depending on enrollment. That is a further question for the General Assembly to tackle later. This bill does not look at that. So I'll pause on that to see if there are questions on why or what this bill, this draft actually does for this category.
I'm just thinking about, thanks, Abby. I think this is good. I'm just thinking about would the structures be, so the structures would not be valued separately from the land. It would just be, it'd be one chunk. So you wouldn't, I mean, I know in current use, there's a different valuation for structures.
Structures and improvements do have a different value. This doesn't impact value in any way, though. This just gets at what's in or out of these categories.
Yeah, okay, all right, yeah, all right, great. Okay, thanks.
Yes, so there are multiple layers to think through when we're imagining different parcels of land. There's what is what is its classification? So starting way up here, is it non-homestead or homestead? Anything that's homestead is not being addressed here. Anything that's non-homestead would then be carved into these different categories.
No, I was tying myself up into not unnecessarily.
Yes, okay. Great, hopefully that's clearer. So it is broader. This, as if you recall from last week, there was a long list of uses that would bump land into this category. That's all gone now. That was taken from looking at other open space land definitions. So that's all gone. It's very broad. It would capture any land that doesn't have a building that falls into another category. So if it were commercial, it would be in commercial or industrial.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so on page 3, this is trying to, again, capture your discussion about how to treat multi-use properties. So this new subdivision I, starting on line 11, if a property has more than one use, each of which, so if each of those uses exceeds 25% or more of the square footage of the property, each use shall be individually categorized. So it's each portion will be falling into its own separate category, provided that a property shall not have more than 4 categories, which if it's 25% or more, you couldn't have more than 4, but just to make that clear. Only one category shall apply to each portion of a property. So again, if there are more than 25, which shall be determined in this order. And there are certainly policy decisions that are being made in this ordering, so you can.
Maybe Catherine can explain her thinking on that after you.
Okay, so the list as it's currently drafted in 1.7 is utility would be the first category, then industrial, then commercial, then secondary non-seasonal dwellings. So those are your really weatherized year-round use dwellings. So you think of those as residences, rental housing, and then affordable housing, seasonal dwellings. Those are your camps that are not for year-round use, and then open land and structures. So that list could be ordered differently if you so chose. What this does not include is a time limitation. So this looks at square footage, so space usage. It doesn't get at when you look at so it could be at any point. The way this is drafted, it could be at any point during the year. It doesn't say 30 days or more or during a certain period of time during the year. And I'll perhaps turn it over to Sims.
Yeah, and so like we thought a little bit about the time, and we sort of said, well, things always have a use, and this was a way of sort of prioritizing if something was ever used as one thing, then that may take precedent over the other uses. And the order was trying to think a little bit about sort of quality of infrastructure and maybe like most active use. So the utility and industrial and commercial, at least sort of in my mind, were more active or infrastructure intensive uses, and that you would categorize the use of that portion of the whole property as sort of most active use, and that you would only classify it as open land and structures if it wasn't at any point being used for something else. So that was the sort of lens in which we went from I to 8. 1.
So I'm trying to get my head around sort of what sort of the impact of this is, because we're really talking, at this point, we're talking about sort of, if you would be a 5th designation for a property, right? Or a 5th, 6th, and 7th designation for a property, if it was a very small use for the property. So this is like really sort of the edge of the policy.
So if someone comes to you and says, well, shoot, I'm using that portion of my building for 2 things, how do I classify it? And that there would be some instruction about how to determine how to categorize that portion of a building that was used for more than one use over the period of a year. So a very probably unlikely scenario, but one you might want to have direction around.
Just the last few words you said were for some portion of the year, is that what you said?
Yeah, so let's say I have wing of my house. And some of the time I'm manufacturing lip balm and other times I'm renting it out as affordable housing. This would direct me to categorize it as one of those things and I assume the lip balm production would be commercial, so that would be commercial.
Yes, but you said for some portion of the year, that was the,
Yeah, I mean, I
I wasn't
guess,
sure if you said that and what you were meaning about that.
so most of the time, this should be pretty easy. You have a building and you use it for one thing. And then you categorize it as that one thing. There might be a situation where half your building is used for one thing and half the building is used for the other thing. And that's, as long as they were more than 25%, you would put 25% of your property one thing and 75%, whatever the portion was, and they would be deemed that specific category. But there may be a situation where over the portion of a year, a portion of your building is used for one thing, and then for the other half of the year, you use it for something else. And this says you still categorize it as one thing based on this order.
I see.
And, yeah, go ahead.
I want to revisit my question, but I don't want to get in the middle of this complicated discussion, so
Okay.
I'm willing to pause.
If you could pause, that would be great.
Yeah.
Because my question, yeah, go ahead.
And maybe just sort of, maybe an extreme example and why we shifted away from sort of time of use is, let's say I have a open land structure that's like just a roof over my lawnmower, and for 99% of the year, it's a roof over lawnmower. But if it's a wedding venue for one time in the year, and that's like a high volume, high activity, large income maker, to me, I would want to have that piece of information as we're collecting data about parcels, that it is used as a commercial venue. But if we just looked at the length of time and went with the thing that was used for the most length of time, you would categorize as open land and structures. But I think I think the intent here is to kind of better understand how properties are used that are non-homestead, and knowing if there's a significant use of that property, even if it's only for a short amount of time. Again, which is why the kind of precedence list here.
So I guess I'm wondering, now that this is sort of in front of us, if sort of following a similar construct to current law, that if it was less than 25%, we actually just don't care. And if that's sort of an easier construct to use. And then if that's really not working, we could reevaluate in another year. I'm not sure. I'm trying to follow Jim's usual mode of keep it simple, stupid. Not to call you stupid, Representative Sims.
Okay. Less than 20%, 25% doesn't count or something. I don't know.
I guess this would also apply even if it was the entire building, but it had more than one use. So, right, so this is in a subsection that says if a property has more than one use, then you break it out for 25%, and or if you have more than one use in one portion or the whole portion. I feel like even though it adds a layer of complication, there will be people who have multiple uses in a property and will have this question of what do I do about that? And I think we should provide some answer. This may not be the right answer, but I think we should have some answer for what if for a portion of the year I do one thing, another portion I have which is a different category.
So what about the situation, let's say somebody is a property owner and they say, I use this property for half the time is for this, a third of the time is for this. And there's some, whatever that is, is it uncategorized, or what do we, how do we, because it's still property value and it exists. How does that get addressed?
Well, so I think this sort of says you identify what those uses are, and then you have to categorize it as the one that's highest up on this list. So if you ever use it as a utility, you have to classify it as a utility, even if you only use it as a utility for parking.
So let's say half of it was utility, a third of it was industrial. That last piece, where does that end up?
You only get to identify one category for your property or a portion of that property.
So it'll be utility, right?
So it'd be 100% utility.
Unless they were different uses at different parts of the building. You could say, you know, if half of your building is a utility and the other half is industrial and the other half is.
There's only two halves.
Okay, it's true.
That's what I'm trying to get at, is what that little piece there, what is that, you know?
Is this a question for the whiteboard?
I think it is.
I mean, then you have to say, what are, then I think you say, if it's a multi-use space, what are the multiple uses? And then you have to pick the one.
I think we should do it.
Yeah, I mean, so this is, I guess, I'm sort of wants.
Wait, Jim's starting with the whiteboard and then he, yep.
Parcel, right?
Yeah.
Huh?
There we go. And we've got portions. Or something like that.
Mhm.
And we got commercial.
Yeah, a half, call that a half,
We're gonna call that 2/3.
2/3, okay.
And we can't tell when I stand up. And we've got,
You spelled that right.
yeah, this time. And this is what, rental?
Sure.
Sure.
Utility.
It's utility.
Okay, so
And is the thing you don't know what's in the question mark, or you
I
use
don't.
it
So
for a
what-
couple of different things? I mean,
Yeah, so what do you call the question mark? What is?
Well, what do you do in the question mark?
So, okay, let's make the question mark.
It's less than 25%.
It's residual.
I mean, okay.
So it's a third, so it's not less than 25%, it's a third. Oh, you wanna make it less than 25%?
Yeah, what happens if that piece is less than 25% or less than 20%?
Abby, how does the bill read now?
So they're only split into multiple uses if it exceeds 25%, getting at that safe harbor idea. So the way it reads, I would see it as being part of one of those, and then it would follow this ordering, I think.
So it would have to be included in, okay, all right.
Well, and I think like the definitions are
Commercial.
Can I, Abby, under existing law, the separation between sort of homestead and non-homestead on a parcel, how does that line up with this construct here?
So that is much simpler because it's only two, so it's either one or the other, or exempt.
If it's just part of the year though, so if something is 25% of the property is used 1/3 of the year.
As business or rental, because they're
Yes.
treated differently.
Oh.
It's part of the, so if it's business, it's only if it exceeds the 25% square footage, in which case it becomes non-homestead. If it's under that, that's the safe harbor that this is trying to reproduce, so it would be all homestead.
Okay.
It's when you have these additional categories, it's not just either or that makes it.
So if it's less than 25% this other, then it gets folded into whichever's already represented on the property according to the priorities on this list.
Yes, but that could be more clear. I'm not sure that was really contemplated while drafting this. So right now it says only one category shall apply to each portion of a property, which shall be determined in the order as follows.
But does it go to the dominant?
Dominant, that kind of gets.
Or the dominant one on the list? So is it the dominant in size or dominant on the list? Because it could be that one's commercial, that one's rental, this one's other, but it's less than 25%.
Right.
If is it gonna go with the one that's dominant in percentage or dominant on the list, I guess?
I would say dominant usage,
Yeah, dominant percentage, right?
percentage of
Dominant
time.
Percentage of.
Right.
It's not the way it reads, but I think it should be clarified.
Okay, we now have too many people talking at once. Abby's gonna finish her sentence and then someone else can talk.
I think it's a point that should be clarified, but that what the language reads is it has to be in this order, but it doesn't say dominant usage or it just says one category applies in this order. So if you wanted it to be irrespective of time or square footage, this is the order when you're not sure, or you could have it split out by always square footage. That makes sense. Right now, there's nothing about time, so it would, I think, default to square footage and then to the order that's laid out with utility and industrial and commercial first.
Representative Anthony.
I guess I would avoid the word dominance, and I would include a phrase like in the order of priority listed below.
Sure, but I'm not sure that solves the sort of essential question of whether it's about the list below or whether it's the percentage of the property, whether, regardless of how we're calculating percentage, which we have two questions on the table about. I wonder if it makes sense to get very clear on what this outstanding question is and ask PVR if they have an opinion about it.
Yes.
Okay.
I think there should be some more whiteboarding though.
Okay. Is there anything you want to add to the whiteboard? I feel really excited that we started using the whiteboard. I feel like it's a really good sign for the committee that we have now used the whiteboard.
I also wanted to add, because I keep saying this has no time limitation, I'm realizing within that first clause of this subdivision, it should say if a property has more than one use at any point during the year, because that's not explicitly stated. I'm reading that in because that's the intent that I've understood, but I would suggest adding that.
Okay. If you could add that, that would be great. And then let's check in with property valuation and see if they have an opinion about this based on all of the work that they do. And that can also be a question that we ask the listers when they come in. And then we still need to talk, I'm just trying to summarize from the cast. Jim, I think we're done with the whiteboard, though if you want to stretch your legs, you're welcome to stretch your legs.
I just want to add one more complication. Peter didn't like the word dominant, but just for the sake of this discussion, it could be dominant in terms of income generation.
Yes,
You know,
that is another, yes.
rental this much to us, but I'm making really fantastic expensive widgets. Big deal, you know, maybe that should be the basis for taxation.
Yeah, lip balm's like $50 a jar sometimes. So those are three different ways that sort of primacy could be. And then the other question I want to make sure we don't lose before I go to Julia is the question around how actually the determinations are made. Julia.
All right, I'm still a little stuck on the open land vis-a-vis the 25% or whatever. So I guess, you know, in current use, which this is not, I acknowledge, is there's a carve out for like a building plus 2 acres, right? In this scenario, because it's not current use, we haven't done like a 2 acres. So if I have, you know, a percentage of my lot has a, you know, manufacturing facility on it, and then I have a percentage of my lot that's just open land to one side, I don't think we've nailed down precisely how we calculate that open land, because is it just the building footprint? Or do we want to have a carve out around that building? Do you see what I'm saying there?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so this is in that order of categorization. When there are multiple uses is the very last one. And there is also language that says structures are included in this category provided the structures and the land surrounding the structures are not otherwise categorized. So that would exclude open land from most of these other categories, or would exclude them from this category and bump them into the other categories. So I'm now realizing, I'm not sure when you could have a multi-use and have open land and structures be in that order. And I think I need to think through how to redraft that, because that's still being drafted as this is only this one use on this land. That is really getting at the idea of vacant land. And there was that unproductive land definition in there that's not any longer. So I'm not, yes, sorry. So that's a great point. I'm not sure how to get around that or if that even fits into your ordering of categories.
Okay, so you're going to hold on to that question.
Think through that.
Okay, Representative Taylor.
Just,
It's actually Representative Taylor who was next.
Well, I've been holding a question. I didn't raise my hand yet, but.
No, you did, but it was a few minutes ago. Maybe you leaned your pen, I don't
What
know.
is I was just wondering exactly what the question is that we're asking PDR to clarify or to ask, to respond to.
What to do about multiple uses of a property, and then also the question of how designation of the property might make the most sense, whether it's something that should be done by appraisers or self-designation or whatever. Are there other, yeah?
That seems like a lot. The first part of that sentence was, what do we do about multiple uses? Isn't that asking a lot of them?
Well, I mean,
What we're trying to decide.
given that we have sort of 4 different scenarios we've laid out, which one makes the most sense to them, given that this is something that they do every day?
Okay. So we're going to lay out the question is going to have the 4 scenarios in them and ask them to consider those and what their response. Okay. All right.
Representative Anthony.
Oh, pass. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Abby, the definition of commercial, comfortable that's broad enough to include parking lots.
Yeah, parking lots.
That's a great question. So commercial means any non-homestead property used for business purposes not otherwise categorized.
Parking lots falls in there.
But as you're asking that, I'm considering whether that would also fall into open land and structures or not.
Maybe some.
I'm not sure.
I think there are different kinds of parking lots. I know it's a ridiculous thing to say, but.
Right, they're paved and not.
Well, no, they're also,
Solar power on. Some people use open fields as parking lots.
Exactly. No, and there are parking lots that are,
Wedding barn.
monthly, like that are, used for profit themselves. There are parking lots that businesses use for their customers or for their employees. And then there are parking lots that are just sort of,
Variety.
yeah.
And I do want to provide sort of a caveat of, I'm not a judge, I would not be interpreting this, I'm just providing how I'm reading these. I hadn't contemplated that particular example. Would you like me to, I think we had talked about who would actually be administering this. And the way this is drafted would put the categorization onto the listers. So it would be a town's responsibility without adding other language saying either an individual all non-homestead owners have to certify their use and these categories, or if you chose to have the state somehow involved. There's currently no language here. So it would, under this version, be up to the listers and the town.
Can you help me understand how, we already know that there's a grand list where the decision about what on the grand list of property has a lot of variation from town to town. That's one of the major reasons we're doing this. How does this differ from sort of how grand list designations happen?
So I can pull up, just give me a moment, I'll pull those up from the PVR report. I know sets out the existing categories. Find that, I think there are maybe 10 currently, one of which is a catch-all or other. And it currently breaks out, for example, residential, depending on the amount of property around residential. Here we are. Okay, yes, there are 15 different categories. Do you want me to read through those?
No, I don't think I'm wondering about what's different about the categories. I'm wondering,
Who categorized?
and I know that listers categorize those properties. My understanding was that this was sort of the tighter definitions would lead to more consistency.
Correct.
Is that the only sort of difference, other than the fact that there are different categories?
The other note that's in the PDR report is that these uses are categorized by listers, and that's based on the property's highest and best use, which is within appraisal methodology generally. So that's also one way that properties are put into these different categories.
I guess I do still feel a little unresolved about this question around carve out or not for differentiating the physical structure versus the property. I mean, I assume like every properties with buildings also have land, and sometimes just a little and sometimes it's a lot. I think as this is contemplated right now, if there's a structure that's used for commercial purposes and it's on, it's a 1 acre building and it's on 5 acres, it would be categorized the same way as a property that's a 1 acre commercial property on 100 acres. And I guess I wonder, do we want to know what portion of the property is structure versus land or not? And I'm sort of imagining a map, like the color-coded map where all the categories are illustrated, and you might have like a very large parcel where only a portion of it is industrial, but the whole thing is color-coded
And if I
pink
might,
or whatever. Certainly seems simpler to just categorize a parcel as a use, but does that tell us everything we want to know about what portion of that property is structure versus land?
kind of piggybacking on this idea, if you have a 100-acre property and a building on 1 acre, then if we're going by square footage, that 1 acre industrial property would not be 25% of the property.
I think the percentages only applied to the portion of
the building. Okay, I think this is where I'm getting really hung up. That doesn't need to be here.
It does say property currently. It could be limited to the building.
Well, I don't think that was intentional according to what Councilman just said.
Just because of that discussion around open land would not be carved out. So it would be the whole property.
Can you say that again?
Tension.
I thought we were talking about the use of the building would define what the, okay. It's not simple. It's not simple to do this.
Yes.
I can't imagine a 1 acre building. I mean, would that be an airplane hangar? That would be a huge
Sorry,
building.
Yeah.
those are just arbitrary numbers. I guess I was
Oh.
saying if we have 2 parcels and the
Yeah.
building is the same on both of those parcels, but one is on just a little land and one is on like a lot of land,
Uh-huh.
there's nothing right now that would identify that for us.
Right.
Like the entire 100-acre property would be.
Does it need to though?
And that's just my question. Do we wanna know that?
See, I can imagine a 100-acre property where half of it is sugar woods. 25% of it is solar panels. And 25% of it is woodlot, which is different than sugar woods. And isn't that all still, however, open land, except maybe not the solar panels? That would be utility.
So I think that's all open land, and utility would only be if that was, the solar panels would only be utility under very certain circumstances even.
Yeah.
So that would just all be open land.
Who would decide all that? Who would designate all that? Was that the owner filling out his tax form?
So then we have to decide that.
Uh-huh. I can see a lot of complications arising. Confusion, trickery maybe. It's woodlot, but if Sugar Woods is cheaper tax-wise, then maybe it's gonna be Sugar Woods 30 years down the road and,
Well, woodlot versus sugar woods would actually happen with current use designations, and then there's a whole sort of enforcement regulation arm, right? But if I think there's a question about whether appraisers should do this or if towns should do this or if individuals should be doing this designation. Because I've personally, and I don't know if everyone else on the committee has, I've received a lot of emails from folks who are upset that someone is marking their property as non-homestead when it's homestead. Do you get lots of those emails? And why isn't anyone fixing it?
I also had another thought as you were discussing the different iterations of a property that has a building and perhaps a lot of acreage is those may be valued very differently depending on the property themselves. So even if you did classify an entire property as commercial, the value will also be reflected in its highest and best use. It's another, because this does not impact value in any way.
I'm now realizing though that the percentages does actually address my concern that in a large parcel, because the percentages apply to the whole parcel, some significant portion of that would be probably land and structures, and only a portion of it that has a building would be classified as something else. So I guess that's why we did that way. Late Friday afternoon. Not much food.
And the 25% again was modeled on the current carve out of homesteads to make use of a dwelling. Again, it doesn't apply to land, but use of a dwelling for business purposes if it's 25% or more of the square footage. So you could also change that percentage if you wanted it to be higher or lower. I think that also would then change the number of categories, but those are policy decisions.
So does anyone have a strong opinion on the less than 25% leaving the list versus just saying less than 25% doesn't matter?
The list, I believe, it isn't less about under 25% and more if there is two uses. Right?
So if there's more than one use that each exceeds 25%, so you have the safe harbor, if it's under 25%, that doesn't constitute another use.
Okay.
And then if you do, the ordering for those, because you can only have 4, is as laid out, starting with that idea. And I don't know if I think I neglected to mention this, you'd mentioned it was based on activity. So that in some way gets at income producing. You'd put sort of the more valuable activities in terms of income producing. So industrial and commercial are first on that list. So those would be the first categories that would be applied.
I'm just wondering about people playing games with categorization, right? And I'm wondering, time, anybody can play games with time, and anybody can play games with income from a this or that or something like that. And I wonder if the simplest way to do it is just to go to percentage of square footage of use. I mean, that's pretty straightforward, I think. This is much of my widget factory, and this is where I make maple syrup, candies or something like that. At least the lister can come in and look around, unless we're moving equipment back and forth. But anyway, I mean, basically it's visible, it's understandable, it's recognizable. So I'm tending, however we settle out the other details, is to settle on square footage usage as a basic metric.
So that's what it is right now. The only reason you'd ever go to the list is if within the same square footage over the course of the year, you do 2%.
Understood.
And how would you resolve that?
The same in this room. Same room.
Half a year it's a lipstick making factory and the other half it's a rental unit.
Then you go to the way we do, the way we do income sensitivity is you're supposed to declare how much of your property, of course this is square footage, but how much of it I rent and how much of it I occupy. So somehow we need an easily recognizable division metric. And if it's the same 75 square feet, geez, I might know. Give me some help here. But I would, mean, I guess you're suggesting one's clearly commercial and the other's clearly maybe is a rental property or something, or, I don't know.
Like I have a storage shed that I only rent out in the summer.
Yep.
Maybe only I rent it out for like a month, but the rest of the time it's just a storage shed. I think we still wanna know that it's rented out, and I would wanna
Yeah.
categorize it that way.
Well, the income sensitivity ways you declare how much of the property, but I guess I'm suggesting that we expand that to say how much of the space broadly defined, which is including not just the space, but and we're gonna make it hard for Abby, but I'm wondering, I'm just suggesting I like it.
I think that's what this does, is make it recognizable. I think the way the language is now.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
It just doesn't have that declaration. There's no, so that said, the town or the listers, if it were still their responsibility to set these categories, they would certainly be interacting with the property owner. But if you wanted it more standardized and more at the state level, you would need to have additional language. So I'm actually just pulling up the homestead declaration because there is a part that recognizes rental income.
I mean, there is sort of the space where this intersects with our other bill. Which feels sort of like a luxurious accident to me, actually.
You can take that down at any time, but in Ways and Means downstairs, we had memorable quotes. It just doesn't have that decoration, and I can make that neater if I stand on a chair.
It just doesn't have that decoration.
Yeah.
Okay.
A. Shepherd, 2/14/23.
Thanks. I love that other committees have like vision statements and priorities for the year, and we just have quotes. I think that's actually appropriate. Thank you. Okay, so this is really quite a Tuesday we're having. Does anyone ever just sort of feel bad for the people who might be watching us at home? I do. I'm feeling that way particularly today. But we actually have a responsibility to each other and to, constituents, not necessarily the people watching at home. So the open land and structures language makes sense to people. Yes, except for this question of how much outside of the footprint of a building is still that building.
Yes.
Yes.
And then also, when we get to the list, to be clear that list is about buildings only and not land. I believe.
I was thinking the list was about everything.
Okay,
That's how it's drafted right now.
okay.
Given that you want land to have its own category, I think it should not be on that list though, because how would you have multiple uses? Either it's land or it's one of the other categories. So I don't think it can be on, I think
I think that's what I'm sort of driving at. That like, if you have 100 acres and you have a building on it in any of those uses.
It's never open land.
It's never once gonna qualify otherwise.
Qualifies land.
No, qualify as industrial, utility, et cetera, because it'll be too small of a piece of the overall footprint.
You're worried about it not being categorized as industrial?
Right.
If it's ever used as industrial, it needs to be categorized as such.
Am I like the only person who's not getting
I
this?
think we've like just tied ourselves up in all kinds of
Yeah.
stuff.
Let's take a 10-minute break and clear our minds.